When you're a tabletop player, a game master, or an author, you have to come up with outlines for stories. Maybe you need to come up with a background for your character. Or maybe you need to come up with the outline for your adventure. Or you're working on a manuscript and you're trying to figure out character arcs, or trying to find a myth to give more depth to your fantasy world. In all those examples, you would be dealing with the big picture. After all, a background only deals with the major defining moments of a character, while an adventure has to stay broad enough so that players can actually take decisions of their own. And if it's a story you're coming up with, well, there's only so much time you can dedicate to minute details. This video is an introduction to the Adventure Crafter by WordMill. Unlike Mythic Game Master Emulator, which I have talked about before and is made by the same person, the Adventure Crafter focuses on the big picture of your adventure. So it helps you come up with a bunch of interconnected events, main plot points, and the main characters. And then you're free to go back through it, either as if you were writing a book, or by playing through your adventure and adding in the details that way. Like Mythic, this system is great at getting you over your writer's block. So it will make you think outside the box by dealing with random rolls and with limitations. You will be able to write backgrounds, to write adventure outlines, and even full-on stories thanks to this system. And if, like me, you're a solo role player, it's also really good to help you come up with an initial scene, or even to throw unexpected twists at you to continue your story. My goal for this video is to give you an overview of the rules and to help you get a grasp on them so it doesn't feel as daunting to start reading through them. So you will get a lot of value from either just watching it and seeing if this could be a good system for you to get, or you can also get the rules and follow along that way. I won't get into all the details, but I want to give you a good grasp of the steps you have to take and what the different charts mean. So hopefully, by the end of this, you'll be feeling confident to start role-playing with the Adventure Crafter. The Adventure Crafter was created by the same person who did Mythic Game Master Emulator, which is Tana Pigeon. Both systems are basically inspiration algorithms. By rolling on random tables, you are given ideas and some restrictions to apply to your story, and as your imagination starts filling the blanks, that's how your adventure starts taking shape. This probably sounds pretty abstract right now, so let me run you through the basics. The Adventure Crafter uses two sheets. You have the adventure sheet, where you will note down the different events in your story, and you have the second sheet with two lists. One is called plotlines, and the other one is called characters. You can probably guess what will be entered in those lists. Plotlines are events and goals happening in your story, and characters are, well, the important people from your adventure. Now, let's get you acquainted with the adventure sheet. At the top left corner, you have a spot to name your story, and right below that, you can put notes on various things. These are pretty self-explanatory, so I won't dwell on them. Our first point of interest is just to the right, where it says Themes. This feature gives you control over the tone of your overall story. Basically, you have 5 themes: action, tension, mystery, social, and personal. And you have to rank them in order of most important to least important. Odds are they will all be drawn upon as your story develops, but the themes you put on top will appear much more than the other ones. For example, if you want a story with a lot of fights and action, you could put action first or second, while if you want your plot to rely more on interpersonal conflicts, rivalry between factions, and dealing with problems by convincing people, then social should be near the top of your list. We'll come back to themes shortly, but first let me introduce you to turning points. Under the teams list, you will see a large rectangle with the following items: turning point, plotline, plot points, characters invoked, and notes. This whole rectangle represents one turning point. In writing terms, a turning point represents one major part of a plotline. Or in other words, each turning point is a major event in your story. Basically, if you'd put all these major events together, you could give a summary of your story. Compared to scenes in Mythic, a turning point would be the equivalent of about 1, 2, or 3 scenes. If you look at this turning point, you will see it can have up to 5 plot points, and each plot point can have one or more characters attached to it. Now, to make things more concrete, here is how we could fill the first turning point in our story. We start by labeling our turning point with a 1. Then we have to say what kind of plotline this is. Is it a new plotline? Is it a development? Or is it a conclusion? So, usually you would start your turning point by rolling on the plotlines list. Basically, this is where you keep track of what is happening in your adventure. During a normal game, your list may look something like this: defeat the magician, protect the town from bandits, defeat the magician again, escape the haunted forest, convince the father of Countess Lamia to give his daughter's hand in marriage. These are basically the goals you set for your characters, and as they pursue them, the adventure will take shape. You can think of these plotlines like the main quest and side quests in a video game. Your story may start with a big quest, but as you explore, you will find smaller ones along the way. Coming back to our plotline selection, usually we would roll a percentile dice and either select an existing plotline or be instructed to create a new one. Since we are starting fresh, we have nothing on our list, so we can check the new plotline box and leave the space blank for now. Alternatively, if we rolled an already ongoing plotline, we would have checked development, and our turning point would simply continue that plotline. The third option, conclusion, is a little bit more tricky to explain, so we will come back to that one a little bit later. Next, we have the main body of our turning point, our 5 plot points and the characters associated with them. To fill out this section, you will need to roll a d10 and a percentile dice. The d10 will tell you which team is selected, while the percentile dice will give you a location on this massive chart called the plot points table. So let's say my list of teams looks like this, and I roll a 2 and a 74. This means I got a 74 in action, which gives me dealing with a calamity. Note that if my teams were in a different order, the same result with tension would give me a need to hide, and teams of social and personal would equal preparation. Each entry is accompanied with a description, and it tells you what these plot points mean for your story. As you get your first plot point, your mind will start trying to interpret it, but you have to hold off for just a few. First, we need to generate our 5 plot points, then we put them all together and interpret them as a group. Sometimes your roll will give you a result of none, which means you end up with 1 less plot point. It's fine to get the none result more than once. Actually, up to 3 times is fine. But if you get it a 4th time, you should re-roll because you need at least 2 plot points in your turning point. Another unusual result is conclusion. When you get that one, you will go back at the top of your turning point and check the conclusion box. Then you will have to think how you can bring this plotline to a satisfying close, letting your players succeed in their goal, or not. After that, you will cross out the plotline every time it appears on your list, because you can't advance that plotline anymore. So, if you roll for that plotline later on, it will count as a result of choose most logical plotline. Another unusual result is meta. When you get a meta result, you will re-roll your percentile dice. and you will get one of the following. Character exits the adventure, character returns, character steps up, character steps down, character downgrade, character upgrade, or plotline combo. As you can guess, most of these deal with characters and how important they are in your story, but the last option, plotline combo, means you would roll for a second plotline and both of them would be advanced in this one turning point. Now, what about the characters? Characters are called upon when you roll for plot points. Usually you will need to roll either 0, 1, or 2 per plot point. But there are no hard and fast rules for which plot point call for characters to be rolled and how many. That being said, many plot points imply you will need one or more characters to be invoked. So usually it's kinda clear when you need to invoke one. For example, if you rolled followed, it means a character is being followed by another character. Well, obviously this implies we need a character being the one followed and another one to be the follower. Just like with the plotlines, we would roll a percentile dice for each character, and both our results would either give us an existing character, or we would be instructed to create a new one. Though, contrary to the plotlines list, you always start the adventure with at least one character. Your player character or characters plural. Moreover, you may even have a few more pre-filled spaces for important characters. For example, you could start with the big villain of your story, or you could have some very important NPCs. Sometimes though, you won't need to roll any character for a plot point. Usually that happens when characters have already been invoked by other plotlines. For example, if we rolled ambush after rolling followed, we could roll 2 more characters, or we could just assume the same character being followed is the one getting ambushed. Also, while this would be a great scenario for an action story where the ambush may lead to a fight or even a chase, you could also interpret this plot point differently if this is not the type of story you're going for. For example, the ambush could just be people throwing a surprise party for their friend. Either way, when you're done with the scene, you will go to your character list and write the names of all the characters you have invoked in the turning point. So if you have your player character plus some kind of monster and an NPC, you would give each of them its own entry on the list. Just make sure you only put the names that you actually invoked in your turning point, and not everyone who appeared in the scene. Therefore, if you listed only one of your player characters, but all 3 of your characters showed up to the actual scene, you would only write the name of the one you rolled. Also, if you wrote the same name for multiple plot points, you would put it only once in your list. Now, as an example, here's how your character list may look at the end of the scene. Notice my player character now appears twice on the list. This is on purpose. It means he will become more important in the story by having more odds of being rolled for. There is one thing to remember though. You can only have the same name appear 3 times in your list, unless the rules specifically tell you otherwise. This will basically only happen if you roll for a meta plotline. Now that you learn how to fully generate turning points, you just need to learn how we generate characters in the Adventure Crafter. Creating characters is pretty easy. We'll be using 3 tables: character special trait, character identity, and character descriptors. Character special trait will tell you if your character is an individual, if it stands in for an organization, if it is an object, or if it relates to your plotlines or your other characters in some way. Meanwhile, character identity and character descriptors will give you 1 or 2 keywords. The first one will give you what job or skills they have, while the second table provides you with a character trait such as beautiful, or wild, or sneaky. Basically, a keyword that instantly gives personality to a character. Here are a couple characters I generated to give you as examples. For the first one, I rolled 73, 24, and 62, which gave me not connected to this plotline. Then I got 2 identities, and I finally got different. So I rolled again twice for my identities and got gambler and scholar. So the first thing that comes to mind when I see those keywords is a gnome that travels the land giving lectures on various natural topics as a scholar, while is using this on-the-road lifestyle as a pretext to tour all the best gambling spots. Maybe this gnome could be very well off if it wasn't for his gambling habit. But since he has one, he is poorly dressed and always in trouble. A character like this would be excellent for starting side quests, as he could certainly be willing to trade his skills and knowledge in exchange for some help with his money problems. For the second character, I got connected to an existing character, Wanderer and Crafter, because again I got 2 identities, and his trait was difficult. So this time I am imagining an elvish man or a woman who wanders the forest picking different resources from the surrounding land. I see them as a kind of nomad, and maybe a bit of a hermit. If one of the player characters is a druid, then they could easily be their mentor or even their family member. Though in a normal game you would roll on the character list to find out who this character is related to. Either way, it's the fact that this character is kinda lonely and lonesome that would make them difficult to approach. Finally, for my third character, I rolled an individual who is religious, young, and passive. I imagine this character could be a healer, maybe some kind of nun, a female monk, or even a priestess. Someone the player character may get help from if they are wounded. She would be considered passive because she would be tied to a religious order and she would be rendering services to the players but not actively starting quests. And on this note, I will be ending the tutorial here. With the information I've given you, hopefully you know if this system would be a good fit for you, and it should clear things up and make it a lot easier for you to get started. Frankly, I think the Adventure Crafter looks a lot more daunting than it really is. I personally like it a lot so far. I've been pairing it with Mythic by using the rules outlined on pages 73 and 74 to do a sort of super system that can handle solo role-playing. I wouldn't recommend people try that from the get-go, but if you have a good grasp on Mythic and on the Adventure Crafter, those two can combine in a pretty awesome way. What I would really recommend, however, is using the Adventure Crafter for coming up with the first few turning points in an adventure, for generating non-player character, and for coming up with backgrounds, myths, for important places and people. I think this is where it's the strongest, because it's basically an inspiration machine. So you want to be using it when you have a little bit of an idea, but you feel like you need help to get started. So far, I've really enjoyed the results of using this system, because I feel like I get almost no writer's block now, and since it gives you some limitations with the random rolls, I feel like my ideas are more original. Compared to Mythic, I think turning points are a little bit easier to interpret than the kind of keywords that you get with meaning tables. I think that's because they're a lot more precise in what they expect you to put in your story, whereas in Mythic, it can be really vague. So that way, it almost creates a different kind of writer's block in Mythic sometimes that I never get with the Adventure Crafter. I guess there's one downside to using the Adventure Crafter for solo role-playing, And that is because you're coming up with a scene kind of in advance with the turning point, sometimes it feels a little bit more expected. But the flip side of that is it's so much easier to interpret. And with this, I will end the video. If you have any questions on more specific rules in the system, please enter them in the comments. I had a lot of people ask me to cover the Adventure Crafter. Here it's more of a general video, but probably a few of you will have more specific questions that I could address in a more specialized video. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope it will help you actually get started with the system or understand it a little bit better. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!